The guards' smirks had vanished, replaced by disbelief. Prisoners' murmurs stopped. Even the warden straightened, rigid, trying to mask the shiver running down his spine. And just as they began to believe they had understood the depth of Daniel's gift, he paused, lifted his gaze, and smiled. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but knowingly. A silence hung heavier than ever, pregnant with curiosity, because everyone could feel it. The performance had only just begun. The room was suspended in disbelief. Daniel's hands hovered over the keys, but this time, the air felt different. The guards who had mocked him hours ago now seemed to shrink in their boots, caught between awe and unease. Every prisoner in the block had turned toward cell 214, their faces pale, mouths slightly open, as if they had glimpsed a miracle in the most unlikely place. Daniel didn't just play music, he commanded it. His fingers danced, fluttered, and struck chords that no one had imagined possible from a battered upright piano in a death row cell. Notes intertwined, twisting into harmonies so complex, so profoundly emotional, that it felt as if the piano itself was alive, telling secrets it had held for decades. The melody shifted suddenly, from gentle, sorrowful whispers to sharp, defiant bursts that ricocheted off the walls. It was impossible to tell whether Daniel was weeping or laughing. The music carried both. Guards gripped the railings, knuckles white, because each note seemed to pierce something deep inside them, something they hadn't felt since childhood. One guard, a man who had served 20 years without a single crack in his stoic demeanor, finally whispered under his breath, This isn't just playing, it's magic." The piano, chipped and scarred, seemed to glow in the morning light streaming through the small window. Daniel's posture shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if he were feeding the music from some hidden well inside him. And then it happened. The melody soared, high notes intertwined with deep, resonant bass, forming a cascade of sound, so rich, so overwhelming, that even hardened prisoners felt tears burn behind their eyes. Somewhere in the back of the hall, a young officer dropped his pen, and it clattered against the concrete floor, sounding like a gunshot. Everyone flinched, but Daniel didn't stop. He had reached a level no one in that room had imagined, a musical language that transcended fear, ridicule, and expectation. And then, in the middle of the crescendo, he played a single chord so powerful, so full of emotion, that it stopped the world inside the prison for a heartbeat. The guards froze. Prisoners gasped. Even the warden's hand tightened on his clipboard as though holding reality together. For a moment, time itself seemed to bend around the music. Daniel's eyes met the warden's, calm and unyielding. And the unspoken message was clear. It was not just a prisoner, he was something extraordinary, something no one had ever dared to see. And just as the first wave of disbelief began to settle, a second, more astonishing secret waited to be revealed, one that would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about Daniel Hayes. The melody had been haunting, magnificent, almost unbearable in its intensity, but it wasn't the full story. Daniel's fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, and the room exhaled with him. Guards who had laughed at his request, prisoners who had dismissed him as just another forgotten soul, even the warden himself. Everyone waited, tense, unsure if they dared to hope for more. Then Daniel did something no one expected. He closed his eyes, not in fatigue, not in despair, but in concentration so deep it felt almost sacred. His hands lifted, hovering just above the keys, but instead of playing the next note in a melody, he began to whisper, a low, soft hum. At first, barely audible, almost imperceptible. The hum blended seamlessly with the piano's resonance, and then it grew. It grew until it became a voice rich, layered, and haunting, intertwining with the music in a way that no one had ever heard before. Each note he played was echoed in harmony by his own voice, creating a sound that was simultaneously orchestral and intimate, monumental and fragile. It was as if the piano itself had found a soul, and that soul was singing. The guard's jaws dropped. One officer gripped the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Is he singing?" he whispered. Double quotes, "Yes," another said, eyes wide, "but it's like an entire choir." Daniel's melody swelled, his voice rising effortlessly over the piano, carrying every emotion imaginable. Sorrow, regret, defiance, beauty, and hope. The air seemed to vibrate with it, the walls echoing his notes like the soul of the prison itself had been awakened. Prisoners pressed their faces against the bars, wide-eyed, tears streaking down cheeks, captivated in a way they had never been before. Even the warden's posture faltered. His clipboard trembled in his hands. For years, he had enforced rules, carried out sentences, believed he understood the limits of human potential. And now, he was watching a man, condemned to die, defy every expectation, showing the raw, untamed brilliance that had lived, hidden inside him all these years. Daniel paused for a moment, letting silence sweep through the room. The stillness was heavier than any lockdown. Every guard, every prisoner, even the warden, held their breath. And then, with a single, final chord, he let his voice soar one last time, a note so poor, so impossibly perfect. It felt like the room itself had been lifted. The piano's last echo lingered in the air, and for a heartbeat, no one moved. No one dared. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim in reverence. Then, slowly, a single guard whispered, almost to himself, "I've never heard anything like that in my life." Daniel opened his eyes. Calm, serene, not proud, not defiant, just present. And in that moment, everyone realized something terrifyingly beautiful. This man, who the world had written off as a criminal, had a gift that no judgment, no prison, no death sentence could ever touch. But just as the room began to recover, a sound outside the cell block interrupted the moment. A visitor, someone with the power to change everything about Daniel's story, someone who could take this hidden genius and bring it to a world that had never seen him. And that visitor had just arrived. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed through the corridor like a drumbeat, a reminder that reality existed outside this suspended world of music. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply turned, eyes meeting the visitor at the door, someone who carried a presence that seemed to pull the room's attention. Even in the aftermath of what had just happened, it was a music producer, a woman whose reputation for discovering hidden talent was legendary. She had heard rumors of Daniel's request, laughed along with the rest of the world, and yet here she was, witnessing the impossible. Daniel rose from the piano, his posture calm, almost regal. He didn't need words. The performance had spoken for him. Guards and prisoners alike watched in silence, hearts still caught between awe and disbelief. The producer stepped closer, holding a small recorder, her eyes wide but kind. I heard everything," she said softly. "Do you realize what you just did? You've stopped this entire prison just by being you." Daniel didn't smile. Not immediately. There was a weight in his expression, a life of regret and pain compressed into decades of confinement. But then, very slowly, a small, genuine smile appeared, a rare crack in the armor of a man who had been defined by his past mistakes. The room, once skeptical and mocking, now hummed with an unfamiliar warmth. The guards, who had entered expecting to witness the absurd, now felt the quiet shift of perspective. Respect. Perhaps even something they hadn't felt in years. Humility. Prisoners murmured to one another, some wiping tears, others simply staring, realizing that greatness can exist in the most overlooked places. And Daniel realized something too. For the first time, his gift had been seen. Really seen. Not judged, not punished. Seen. The producer extended her hand, offering a bridge to a world beyond these walls. Daniel hesitated, letting the moment stretch. It wasn't just a choice, it was a promise, a chance to let the music he had kept buried for decades escape into the lives of people who could finally hear it. And as his fingers grazed the piano one last time, the note rang out. Poor, resonant, unforgettable, like a heartbeat, a farewell, and a beginning all at once. The guards turned away, heads bowed slightly, transformed in their understanding. Prisoners whispered to one another, hope flickering in eyes that had long been dim. And Daniel, the man who had been mocked, ignored, and condemned, walked toward the visitor, stepping into a possibility that had seemed impossible mere hours ago. Sometimes, the world underestimates the quietest people. Sometimes, it takes a single note played, with courage, with heart, with humanity. And in that small prison, in that quiet cell, Daniel Hayes had done exactly that. The fluorescent lights flickered above cell 214, casting long, jittering shadows across the cold concrete floor. The sound of metal doors slamming echoed down the hallway, each slam like a heartbeat counting down to something inevitable. Guards shuffled nervously, muttering to one another as they prepared for what they assumed would be just another routine execution. But Daniel Hayes, the prisoner on death row, sat calmly on his narrow cot. His hands rested on his knees, fingers intertwined, eyes staring at the corner where the shadows met the wall. For years, the prison had defined him by one thing: his crime, a life sentence followed by death, a name whispered with fear and disgust, and a man no one bothered to understand. Tonight, though, he had a request so strange that it had set the prison bureaucracy into chaos. "I want a piano," Daniel said when the warden asked what he wanted for his last hours. The room had gone silent. Then laughter erupted, sharp and cruel, bouncing off the cinder-block walls. "A piano." One guard scoffed. "You're on death row, buddy. Not some fancy music recital." "Maybe he wants to play a tune for the guards before we—" Another guard chuckled. But Daniel didn't flinch. His calm demeanor made the room even more uncomfortable. There was a quiet authority in him, a subtle weight to his presence that no one wanted to acknowledge. His request was final, non-negotiable. Hours later, the piano arrived, a battered upright that looked like it had survived decades of abuse. The guards positioned it near the window, the weak morning light catching the chipped edges of the wood. Daniel's eyes softened, just a fraction, as he approached it. Some officers whispered bets, some rolled their eyes, and a few filmed on their phones, expecting a farce, a final humiliation. The first time Daniel touched the keys, the prison held its collective breath. Nothing loud, nothing showy, just a single noted deep, resonant tone that seemed impossibly full for such a small, battered piano. It hung in the air, almost tangible, like a shadow that hadn't existed before. A shiver ran through the room. Guards shifted uneasily, realizing that what they had expected a joke might not happen. Daniel's fingers hovered above the keys, and for the first time that night, the prison felt quiet, tense, waiting. And then, just as one guard snickered and turned away, something no one expected began to happen. The first note lingered, vibrating through the walls like a whisper that refused to be ignored. Daniel's fingers hovered lightly above the keys, almost hesitating, as if measuring the gravity of the room. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pressed another note, and another. A melody unfolded. Not rehearsed, but raw and intimate, the kind that feels like it was buried inside someone for decades, waiting for the right moment to breathe. The sound filled the tiny cell block, bouncing off the concrete walls, echoing in the hallways where guards had gathered. Some leaned against doors, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Others froze mid-step, forgetting the routine of their patrols. Even the prisoners in neighboring cells quieted, ears straining. Daniel's face remained calm, almost serene, but his eyes glimmered with something alive, something no one had ever seen before. Each note carried weight. Each chord told a story. There was grief, yes, but also hope, defiance, and a strange, haunting beauty. One guard, still convinced this was some trick, muttered under his breath, "What the hell is he playing?" Another shook his head, gripping the bars. "I don't know, but I've never heard anything like it." Daniel didn't glance up. He didn't need to. The piano had become a conduit, a way to strip the world down to its rawest emotions. The chipped wood seemed to resonate with his touch, amplifying the warmth in the cold room. Even the fluorescent lights, buzzing overhead, seemed to dim in respect. The sound was delicate one moment, almost fragile, then fierce the next, cascading through the hall like a storm contained in a single heartbeat. Guards who had laughed only minutes ago now leaned forward, uncertain whether to admire, fear, or envy the man before them. A faint murmur ran through the crowd of onlookers. Some whispered, some held their breath, and a few dared to wipe tears from their eyes. In a place where life was measured in rules and confinement, Daniel's music reminded them of something lost. Freedom, beauty, humanity. And just when the guards began to relax, thinking perhaps they had seen all they were going to see, Daniel struck a chord that was different, louder, full of tension, pain. Something so unexpected that it silenced the entire corridor. The prisoners, the guards, even the warden, everyone leaned in. No one moved. And then, slowly, deliberately, Daniel's fingers began to dance across the keys, faster and more intricate than anyone could have imagined, as if the piano itself had been waiting all these years for his hands. The room, once skeptical and mocking, was now entranced. But what he played next would make even the most hardened guards question everything they thought they knew about him. Daniel's fingers moved like lightning across the worn keys, a blur of motion that seemed impossible for a man so gaunt, so quiet, so confined for decades. The melody was no longer simple or gentle, it was urgent, alive, and full of a depth that stole the breath from the air. Every note was a story, every chord a confession. The guards, who had entered the cell with a sense of superiority, now shifted uneasily. Their eyes darted around, trying to find the source of the spellbinding music. Some gripped the metal railings, knuckles white, as if holding on to reality itself. The warden leaned against the wall, jaw tight, unable to speak, while a few prisoners peeked from their cells, whispering among themselves. For a moment it felt like the walls themselves were listening. The droning hum of fluorescent lights faded beneath the richness of the piano. The clang of distant doors and footsteps replaced by the resonance of something human, something raw. Daniel's face was calm, almost meditative, but his eyes told another story. Grief, longing, a lifetime of regrets, and a flicker of defiance that refused to be crushed. He played as if the piano were his only witness, his only chance to leave a mark that would outlast the prison walls, the guards, the sentence, even death itself. One guard, young and skeptical, whispered under his breath, "I didn't know he could play like that." Another shook his head, tears glinting in his eyes, quickly wiped away, embarrassed at being moved. Even the hardened veterans, men who had seen violence and despair daily, shifted uncomfortably, feeling emotions they had long buried. And then it happened. Daniel's hand slowed for a heartbeat, hovering above the keys. Silence filled the room, not the empty, oppressive silence of the prison, but a silence heavy with anticipation, as if every soul present was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Then, without warning, he struck a single key deep, resonant bass note, and everything changed. The melody twisted, building into a crescendo so powerful that it seemed to shake the floor beneath them. It was a sound that carried triumph and sorrow simultaneously, a contradiction no one could reconcile.